In the early 1960s, Indonesia was still a young nation learning how to breathe after centuries of colonial rule. Its people had survived Dutch exploitation, Japanese occupation, and war. Independence was not just political, it was emotional. Indonesians believed the land, the rivers, the forests, and the future finally belonged to them. At the center of this fragile hope stood President Sukarno, a charismatic leader who spoke of dignity, unity, and independence in a world divided by powerful empires. Sukarno believed Indonesia should not be forced to choose sides in the Cold War. Instead of aligning with Washington or Moscow, he promoted a vision of non-alignment, where newly independent nations could chart their own paths. This idea threatened a global order built on influence and control. Indonesia was not just large in population, it was rich in oil, rubber, tin, and strategic sea routes. Independence here meant more than symbolism. It meant control over resources. Foreign companies that once dominated Indonesia's economy began to lose their grip. Sukarno pushed policies that reduced external influence and emphasized national ownership. These decisions were popular at home, but alarming abroad. In the Cold War mindset, economic independence was often interpreted as ideological rebellion. To powerful nations watching from afar, Indonesia began to look less like a partner and more like a risk. At the same time, Indonesia's internal politics were complex and tense. The Communist Party of Indonesia, known as the PKY, was growing rapidly, not through armed rebellion, but through unions, farmers' groups, and civic organizations. Many members were teachers, laborers, and rural villagers. For millions of Indonesians, the PKY represented hope for land reform and social justice, not revolution. Yet fear often ignores nuance. The military watched these developments closely. While Sukarno balanced competing factions, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Economic hardship, inflation, and political rivalry created an atmosphere of uncertainty. Rumors spread faster than facts. Trust eroded quietly. In moments like these, history often turns on a single spark. That spark came on the night of September 30th, 1965. Several high-ranking Indonesian generals were kidnapped and killed under unclear circumstances. By morning, the nation was in shock. Almost immediately, blame was placed on the PKI. No full investigation took place. No public trial followed. The story was decided before the questions could be asked. Major General Suharto quickly stepped forward, presenting himself as the man who could restore order. Using the fear and confusion of the moment, he claimed the nation was under threat from an internal enemy. Radio broadcasts repeated the accusation. Newspapers echoed it. A single narrative began to dominate public consciousness. What followed was not spontaneous chaos. It was systematic. Across cities and villages, lists were drawn up. Names were whispered. Accusations required no evidence. To be suspected was enough. Teachers, farmers, artists, students, and civil servants were suddenly labeled enemies of the state. Many had no political involvement at all. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Families disappeared overnight. Rivers carried bodies. Villages fell silent. The violence was intimate and personal, carried out with terrifying efficiency. Estimates vary, but historians believe between 500,000 and 1 million people were killed within months. It remains one of the largest mass killings of the 20th century. Survivors were not spared. Those who lived were marked for life. Former prisoners were banned from jobs, education, and public service. Even their children inherited the stigma. Silence became a survival strategy. To speak was dangerous. To remember was forbidden. Outside Indonesia, the reaction was disturbingly calm. Some foreign governments described the events as a successful transition. Strategic interests overshadowed human cost. Indonesia, once defiant, was now open to foreign investment and aligned with Western powers. Stability, it seemed, had been restored, at an unimaginable price. Suharto officially replaced Sukarno and ruled Indonesia for more than 3 decades. His government promoted economic growth while suppressing dissent. The official history taught in schools portrayed the mass killings as necessary. Questioning this narrative was treated as betrayal. For years, mass graves remained unmarked. Families were never told where their loved ones were buried. Public mourning was impossible. History itself became a controlled space. The past was not debated. It was dictated. Only decades later did survivors begin to speak. Testimonies emerged slowly, painfully. International researchers and human rights groups uncovered documents and eyewitness accounts that challenged the official story. What had been framed as chaos began to look like coordination. The tragedy of 1965 was not only the loss of life, but the loss of truth. A nation was taught to forget its own wounds. Generations grew up knowing only fragments, whispers, and shadows of what happened. Indonesia's story echoes others around the world, nations that sought independence, control over resources, and political autonomy, only to face destabilization and violence. The pattern is familiar, even if the names change. This history forces uncomfortable questions. Who decides which lives matter? When does stability become an excuse? And how many stories remain buried because remembering them is inconvenient? Today, Indonesia continues to grapple with this legacy. Calls for recognition and reconciliation grow louder, especially among younger generations. Memory, once suppressed, has a way of resurfacing. History does not disappear when it is silenced. It lingers, in families, in landscapes, in unspoken grief. The events of 1965 are not just Indonesian history. They are a warning about what happens when fear replaces humanity. To remember Indonesia 1965 is not to reopen wounds, but to acknowledge them. Because history that is hidden has a way of repeating itself. And silence, no matter how long it lasts, is never the end of the story.